Good evening. I am Linnea Schroer, and I am the Acting Region 3 Wildlife Manager. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We hope that this meeting will be informative and you will be able to get answers to any questions that you may have. Our agenda tonight is pretty simple. FWP staff will present proposals for Southwest Montana, Region 3. We're first going to give a general overview of some of the larger changes that we've proposed, and then we're going to go through all our proposals by individual hunting district. If you have a question during the presentation, please type it in the chat or raise your hand. Both of those should be at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you do have comments on the proposals, please submit them online at fwp.montana.gov so your feedback can be captured accurately. And Morgan's going to show you how to do that right now.
All right, everyone. So like Linnea said, we want to make sure your comments are captured completely and accurately. And so the best way to do that is to do it through our website, and we'll show you how to do that here. So if you go to fwp.mt.gov, and you'll see the homepage here. You scroll down, and then there's this box right here. This is comment by October 20th. This is where you can find all of the proposals that for the whole state. And so you'll see a timeline here of how these proposals are moving forward, and we'll talk about this in more detail in just a minute. If you think of a question after this meeting that you forgot to ask, you can click Ask a Biologist, and that will notify us of your question, and then we will email you a response. We've been doing that for quite a few questions so far. And then there's different ways to submit your comments. Probably the easiest way is to do it online here. And then looking at this map of the state, you can see some of these proposed changes. And the proposed hunting district boundary changes are outlined in red. And unchanged boundaries are in yellow. And you can come over here to the right, and you can select or deselect these layers to view the changes as they compare to how things currently are. So this screen or this layer shows the current hunting districts. You can deselect that, and then it will show you the proposed changes here. And you can zoom in and click on individual districts to see what they look like. And then if you scroll down here, you can see all of the proposed changes listed by region. And so you can click on the hunting district you're interested in, and it will download a PDF of the proposals for that district for you. And it'll list the contact information for the biologist of that district as well. And then to submit your comments, you can put your contact information in here if you want. You can select the different hunting districts that you want to comment on, which is also optional. And then in this dialog box, you can add your comments in their entirety. And you can go and do that for each region, same process there. So, and our biologists have been watching these comments and questions as they've come in and monitoring that feedback. And so if you haven't done so already, this is a great way to submit those comments online. So any questions so far on that kind of logistical piece on how to submit comments? Okay. And like Linnea said throughout this meeting, if you have questions, we'll try and stop and answer each question as we get it. Best way to do that is to either submit it in the chat box or to click raise your hand, and we'll go through them. Okay, so first question from Chris says, are questions from others shared, just so we don't ask the same questions as others? We can make these visible to everyone in the chat. So hopefully future questions should be visible to everyone. We're going to try and locally repeat each question as we get it so that everyone can hear if they're on the phone. Okay, so we will get back to the presentation here. Go ahead, Linnea.
Yeah, thanks, Morgan. So please be sure to get your comments in by October 20th. As you can see by our timeline, we are in the middle of our first round of public comment that started September 21st, and it goes through the end of October 20th. After that, FWP staff will start reading that feedback and adjusting the proposals based on what they hear. And then FWP will present those adjusted proposals to the Fish and Wildlife Commission. They will then determine which proposals go forward for another 30-day public comment period. That next comment period will start somewhere mid-December through mid-January. Those exact dates will be on our website. And we will also be holding additional open houses along with other season setting proposals. Following that second round of public comment, then in early February, the commission will adopt final regulations. Anything to add to that, Morgan?
No, I think you covered it. One small housekeeping thing to mention. Okay. I might have a hard time seeing chat as they come in while I'm sharing the screen. So if folks are putting questions through the chat, just be patient with me and we'll see if we can track those.
Okay, so there's been a lot of staff in Region 3 involved in this process. I'm sure you know many of us already. We've got Vanna Bacadori, who's our Butte area wildlife biologist. Julie Cunningham is our Bozeman area wildlife biologist. Adam Grove is Townsend area wildlife biologist. Morgan Jacobson is here today, right now, as the host. He's our information and education program manager. Jesse Newby is our Dillon area wildlife biologist. I'm acting wildlife manager. Jenny Sika is out of Helena. Dean Walty is our Sheridan area wildlife biologist. Michael Yarnell is Livingston. And then Marina Yoshioka is our regional supervisor. And I'll let all of the staff introduce themselves more fully when we get to their districts. So we have a few slides just of a general overview of what we're attempting to do here. We received a statewide directives for simplification of our hunting regulations. So we are attempting to reduce the total number of hunting districts, reduce the number of license and permit types, to eliminate portions, eliminate unlimited mule deer buck licenses, and eliminate split seasons. And again, you'll have opportunity to ask questions about these when we get into specific hunting districts. So Region 3 currently has 45 hunting districts. We propose to combine these into 27. We're reducing the number of individual deer and elk districts in the region by 1/3. We proposed one cross-regional redistricting in HD 343, 293, and 284, shown here on this slide. We have three distinct boundary changes based on biology. A portion of HD 380 will be placed into 312. HD 310, 360, and 301 will be redistricted based on GPS collar data and to protect under objective winter elk in 310. HD 311 and 320 will be redistricted to reflect elk distribution, brucellosis, and management needs. And then hunting district 328 will be eliminated. So again, we're looking at the elimination of portions. 312 mule deer portion will be removed. 311 mule deer and elk portion will be removed and incorporated in new district boundary into a new district boundary regulation package. 393 mule deer portion will be removed. 314 elk portion removed. 329 elk portion removed. 380 elk portions removed, and 391 elk south portion, which is south of Duck Creek, will be removed. We also are seeking to reduce LPTs and split seasons. We propose to eliminate unlimited buck permits in HD 380 and 392 and eliminate north and south portion elk B licenses in HD 380. We also propose to eliminate either sex elk permits and the split season in HD 340. And from here, I'm going to turn it over to Julie Cunningham.
Hi, I'm Julie. I'm the Bozeman area wildlife biologist. We're starting with hunting district 301. We're going to be going through the hunting districts kind of numerically. So for 301, though, it really is related to hunting district 311. So you'll see when we get to 311, another slide that's going to look really similar to this. Well, let me just describe this change quickly. The old hunting district 311 was split in half by Highway 84, which goes from Four Corners to Norris. And it was a portion. It was a portion for elk. It was a portion for deer. And given that we can't have portions and there's a desire to manage elk differently north than south of that highway, I would have been left with two hunting districts. Well, we needed to combine hunting districts. So I looked at the south half of 311 and saw a management similarity between the south half of old 311 and current hunting district 301. Even though these are distinct elk herds, they're managed similarly. Similar open, mostly accessible habitat. And so the proposal is to combine them. Now, we are largely trying to reduce split seasons, but in this case, it would retain a split season for biological reasons. The herd is within objective, so it needs a moderate regulations package instead of a more liberal season-long either sex regulation. But that is something we could revisit if need be. Deer management wouldn't change in this new District 301. And I think we have one more 301 slide if you want to advance one, please. And it's related to the 301 specific elk B license. We did get direction if there's a B license that numbers fewer than 50, we should get rid of it. And this is a case I'd thought about getting rid of this district's B license anyway. It was a private land only B license. It wasn't meant to try to influence the herd. 301 is largely public land, but there's some private land portions where elk can be challenging to agricultural producers. So I tried to put out a B license valid on private land only, but success was virtually non-existent on this license type. So this license type wasn't really working to do what we wanted it to do anyway. hopefully any landowner elk conflict issues can be resolved through our game damage program instead. And that's it for 301. If there's questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, your 302 biologist will be on next.
Thanks, Julie. Any questions on Hunting District 301? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to 302.
Well, I'm Jesse Newby, and I have the 10 districts in my responsibility area, and so that includes Hunt District 302. And the proposal there is to change the boundary, which used to follow the Medicine Lodge drainage divide, and move it out to the highway 324. And this would effectively eliminate Hunt District 328. As you'll see later, the west half of 328 would go with Hunt District 329. And this was based on biological information. In 2018 and 2019, there were 60 collared cow elk in association with the brucellosis work, but it also provided seasonal movement information. And the cows that were collared in the 302 area tended to stay within 302 and move between 302 and Idaho and up over Maiden Peak. So this new district boundary would capture those movements more effectively. It would also make it much easier to follow the boundary since it's following a highway and not a divide. And I believe there might be another slide there, Morgan. So this wouldn't really affect much of the harvest regs. It's brow tine bull and antlerless elk and either sex mule deer throughout the area. So it wouldn't change much of that. It would create some difficulties in that we collect harvest data from our harvest survey information at the district scale, but that's probably worth sacrificing to capture the biology of the animal's movements better. And there might be one more slide. Yeah, so the one thing that would change, while elk and mule deer would remain the same, we would expand the antlerless B permit, the 399 permit, into this throughout this area. And that's largely due to concerns about the expanding whitetail population in the area, increasingly moving up Medicine Lodge in particular, and out into Horse Prairie. We have concerns about potential competition with mule deer and also with CWD. It gets into that whitetail population that could be passed on to other cervids like mule deer, elk, and moose. And I think that's pretty much all I have for 302, Morgan.
Yeah, that's the last slide for today. Any questions from anyone on Hunting District 302 for deer and elk? Okay, not seeing any, so we'll move on to 303, Jesse.
This one is largely a change in name only. I wanted to retain Hunt District, what's currently Hunt District 300, within its own district. In part, that was because this district receives a lot of intense hunting pressure that's been increasing rapidly over the past 6 years or so. And the access is pretty good, so people can get around there pretty well. So I think I could foresee situations in the future where we might want to apply special management prescriptions to that 300 area independently from the rest of the tendoys. The other part of that was when those 60 elk were collared, we found that animals that were collared in that 300 area tended to stay within that 300 area or move between 300 and Idaho, we saw surprisingly little movement between 300 and 302. And so biologically, it seems to be separating distinct herds, at least somewhat. Now, this conversation is a little complicated because the number you see up there is 303, and that's intentional. The major change I wanted to make in that 300 district was to rename it something other than 300. And the reason for that was because it seemed like in the harvest statistics, when we do those harvest surveys, there was some unknown proportion of people hunting using the number 300 as a catch-all for hunting in region 3. And so it's inflated some of the numbers, it appears, within that district. And so if we could change something that they couldn't shorthand to 300, it might improve the reliability of those harvest surveys. And I think that, oh yeah, so this district is currently a limited buck permit. Right now it's sitting at 30 buck permits. And we're having a lot of conversations internally and also with people we're talking to, hunters and sportsmen, about the sustainability of some of these buck permits. We have serious concerns that moving that age class to older mature bucks is the wrong direction to be going if we want to limit the spread of CWD. There's been an increasing body of work that indicates that managing for high buck-doe ratios, particularly mature buck-doe ratios, increases the spread and prevalence of CWD. At this time, I'm not planning to remove that 300 district from a limited buck permit. We haven't yet detected CWD in there, but it is quite close into adjoining districts. It's a conversation that we'll have to have eventually if CWD is detected in there. For now, I'm proposing to increase the number of buck permits to about 50. Over the course of implementing those buck permits, we usually see harvest success of a little over 50%. So this would probably mean a little over 25 bucks harvested legally. And so it's kind of a first step in bringing down that mature buck to doe ratio. That mature buck to doe ratio right now is sitting exceptionally high. It's been hovering around 30 for the past 3 years. And I think the next one would be whitetail. So again, this is the same as in 302, expanding that 399 antlerless whitetail permit into that 303 district, again, to address competition with whitetails and the potential spread of CWD. I think that should be it for 303, Morgan.
Yep, that's all I got for 303. Any questions from anyone for Jesse on Hunting District 303? Okay, seeing none, we're on to Hunting District 309, Julie.
This is me again, Julie Cunningham. So for a no change proposal, this merits a little bit of discussion nonetheless. District 309 is a weapon restriction area around the greater Bozeman area. It's largely private land and there are deer and elk within it. We have not proposed a boundary change. I've been looking in the public comments and seeing several people have suggested in the public comments we should make a boundary change. And that really is the right way to do it, is through the public, because biology doesn't really dictate the boundaries of a weapon restriction area. That's a public safety and social acceptance argument. So I encourage anybody who's listening who cares about the boundaries of this district to please write in with your thoughts And we'll spend some time looking at it. This district was created in 2005, and given the growth in the Bozeman area, it's kind of surprising how few adjustments we've actually made to this boundary to date. I'm always open to discuss that. It's worth saying that as we are looking to reduce license permit types, one of the ways we can do that is have the same license or permit type valid in larger areas. So if you're a hunter who's in Bozeman, you may not want to get a 309 specific license. You may want to get a license that's valid in many areas in the Bozeman area, so you can just go hunt a greater area. So we will have retained the 397 elk B license, which is also going to be valid in the larger combination of the new 311 and the new 312, which is going to be the combination, if all goes through, of 390, 393, 312, we'll talk about later. It'll also be valid in 309. There is a white-tailed B license that was valid in the old hunting district 312 and 311, which were neighbors here. And we had it at 5 per person. That one we are proposing to reduce to 2 per person, because when we make the district combinations in 312, 390 and 393, we're not ready to accept 5 potential white-tail B licenses per person. Nonetheless, even in places like 312 and 309 and parts of 311 where there are high white-tailed deer numbers, we feel like this compromise would still allow one hunter can still shoot 4 antlerless whitetail, 1 on the general, 1 on the region 3B license, and then 2 on these white-tailed deer B licenses. So I still feel like there's a lot of management flexibility in areas where there are a lot of whitetail, but hopefully not so liberal with the B licenses as to be problematic in portions of these newly combined districts, if this all goes through, as to be problematic for the whitetail population. So I think that is 309. Was there another 309 slide, or is it on to 310?
That's it for 309.
Happy to take further questions on 309. And honestly, some of this might come a little more clear when we finish 311 and 312, which are coming up next. We're going to be doing some Bozeman area districts kind of all in a run. So be thinking about your questions for a few minutes and we can answer them soon. Do you want to move on to 310, Morgan, or wait a second longer? Okay.
Real quick, I want to check in with folks and make sure that everything's coming in okay, the sound and the picture. If someone could just let us know through the chat if things are coming in all right. All right. Thanks, Brett. Appreciate it. Okay, we'll move on to 310.
Okay, District 310, 360, and the southern part of Old 311, I proposed a little redistricting based on GPS collar data. The Buck Ridge area is heavily used by the elk that reside year-round in District 310 and portions of Yellowstone Park. It's a resident elk herd that's far below objective, but 360 has elk that are within or above objective. And so 360 has got a very liberal license type. This boundary adjustment I've proposed is to hopefully help protect the hunting district 310 wintering elk herd and help it come back towards population objective. It's a largely public land district. So we love to see our elk wintering on public land. So a little extra protection from them, perhaps by allowing the conservative license type that exists in 310 to extend to the full, more fully to the areas used by the herd. I do think it's important to mention that in all the discussion of removing portions, we're looking to retain the Gallatin Special Management Area, which is also known as the buffer zone. It's pretty historic. It was carved out by the legislature in the early 19-teens and was open to hunting five bulls on permit only in about 2005 or 6. And it's a great little trophy district, great opportunity, got a lot of neat history in that area. So we are looking to retain that. I have not proposed any changes with that. Any questions or anything on 310, or should we move to 311?
Any questions so far, folks? All right, that's any 311.
All right, we talked a little bit about 311 back with the 301 license. So the new 311 is really going to reflect two things. One is the herd that leaves the Spanish Peaks and the Flying D, and when it crosses Highway 84, leaves an area of large open space preserves and enters small private land farm fields in a DNRC matrix. Very different habitat, and the management strategy needed to help everybody get along out there is a lot different. The north part of 311 is the old portion of the old district. So my goal here is retain everything as it existed in the portion in a new district. So that means it will have the same number of elk B licenses will be joined with 312 and 309. I think the next slide will talk about the deer management. I do want you to notice we're taking a little piece of District 333. It's over by Sappington Bridge. Biologist Dean Walty and I have talked about it, and we've been watching the elk moving back and forth in that area for a long time. And we feel like this new boundary and addition to District 311 will help better manage elk that are really spending quite a bit of time in 311, need to be managed similarly. Next slide, please.
The next one's for 312.
Oh, it's not the 312 deer. I thought I added 311. We'll have the, right now in old District 311, there are 200 mule deer B licenses, and the plan is to retain those in this new hunting district 311. Okay. This one can be confusing. There is a resident herd. It's a completely private land herd that is west of the Madison River. And then there's the migratory herd that comes back and forth across Highway 84. And then there's the Sappington Bridge herd. So there's a lot going on in this little district. So if there's questions, I'm happy to entertain them. We've been fortunate to have a lot of radio collar data in this area to really help us. It will retain a shoulder season, just like it has right now.
Thanks, Julie. Any questions for Julie on Hunting District 311? Boy, everyone's quiet so far. Okay, we'll move to 312.
So this one, I'm going to stay on for just a second, but this one really is a work in progress collaboration between Adam Grove, Michael Yarnell, and myself. And so there are aspects of this district that I almost think I'd rather have Adam present or Michael present. I'd like to do the mule deer portion, but Adam, would you like to do the combination, in particular, the 380 edition and the elk shoulder season, please?
Real quick, we do have one raised hand from Jared, so I'm going to allow him to unmute himself.
Got it. Sorry, I was just getting my hand raised for the the questions I had for this. If you can let them continue if you want to come back to me.
Okay. Yeah, we can do that, Jared.
Alrighty. Can I go ahead, Morgan? Or
Yep, go ahead, Adam.
yeah, this is Adam Grove. I'm the area wildlife biologist in town. Thanks for everybody attending tonight. As Julie mentioned, we're looking at combining a portion of hunting district 380, the existing hunting districts 312, hunting districts 390 and 393, all together into a new hunting district 312. Currently, all those districts, except the small portion of 380, are currently part of the Bridger Elk Management Unit. So in a way, all those districts are managed together under that existing elk management unit. Going forward, if the proposal is adopted, the season type would be a broad time bull or antlerless elk for both general archery and the rifle season. We to have a shoulder season since we continue to be well over objective in that elk management unit. The shoulder season would be a post-season shoulder season. So it'd go from the end of the general season until February 15th. And we're proposing that not be valid on national forest land in the new hunting district. The existing, there would be a new 397 over-the-counter antlerless elk B license. That would be valid in all three of those or in the new hunting district, those 3 existing hunting districts in that small portion of 380. And then it would also be valid in hunting districts 309 and 311. The portion of 380 that we're looking at combining is the portion between the Missouri River and Highway 287. There's a group of foothills kind of right along the river. Elk have kind of moved into that area in the last probably 10 years or so. The thought is those elk probably originated either out of the 16-Mile Creek area or out of the Horseshoe Hills. Anyway, those elk are not tied into the primary Elkhorns area of hunting district 380. Most of that area is private land where those elk are found. We've started to have some agricultural game damage issues. We actually ended up doing a game damage hunt in that area this year. So anyway, we think going forward that portion of 380 management wise will fit better in with that new hunting district 312. I don't know if is there another elk slide on that, Morgan?
It looks like we're on to Mule Deer for 312.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions related to the elk portion that one of us can answer in relation to the proposed new 312?
So we do have one question from Kyle, and he says, how do the biologists here estimate that these proposed changes to all districts will affect my availability and chance of success as a public land hunter compared to private landowners and outfitters hunting on private land?
I guess my thought is I don't think it'll really, at least in regard to elk, I don't think it'll, by combining the 3 districts, I don't think it'll really change any opportunity on public land. Obviously, what's driving elk numbers is anybody that's familiar with that area, what's driving elk numbers in that elk management unit for us to be over objective is related to access issues, the private properties, often large private property owners that have elk during the general season. And then access to during the shoulder season varies across that area. You know, sometimes landowners that are open during the general season will be closed during the shoulder season and vice versa. But I think with the proposed, you know, and I guess maybe Julie or Michael can speak to their portions, but overall, I don't think there will be really any difference in opportunity by combining the 3 districts. It's just, you know, I guess management wise for that, I kind of see a trade-off that they'll be similar to what they are or whatever. I don't know if Julie or Michael want to add anything on that question or not.
Morgan, I see a note that says you would like to answer this question live.
Yeah, that's just our chance to address that here.
Okay. Yeah, I guess, Kyle, the way I read your question is pretty global, not local even to the bridge or just across Region 3, and not to speak for everybody. But I'd say I don't think any of us really probably made any major sea changes deliberately for public or private or anything like that, but trying to reflect areas that were similar and instead of having, you know, many, you know, 3 different districts with different bee licenses and different general season regulations, but the same elk herd. Let's just bring things together and try to stay true to the director's orders to simplify. And in simplifying, not losing opportunity was a really big key and goal for, I think, many or most of us, was not to lose that public hunter opportunity.
Okay, thanks, Adam and Julie. If no one else has anything to add on that particular question, I know Jared has a question now. We'll let him ask.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Sorry. private landowner in HD 390 currently. And I had some real concerns. I submitted, I think early in the proposal period, in the comments period. And 390 to me, I've been hunting 390 for 11 years now. And I guess this question may be posed more to Adam, but 390 to me has a lot of distinct qualities that seem to be unnatural to merge into 312. The private land capability and the herds that I see and I witness and I spend a lot of time with, a lot of those herds come out of either the Horseshoe Hills or come off of the CA and the Bar None. And I think to me personally, a merge with 391 may make more sense, but to merge with 312 and the management objectives of 312 doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to me.
Yeah, we've actually got some radio collars out there. There were some collars put into the Horseshoe Hills last winter as part of the statewide brucellosis monitoring effort. We've seen a lot of those collars have moved back and forth in the hunting district 390. There's an old, there was the old 16-mile creek elk study done back in the, I believe that was done in the early 90s, that identified there's basically like 3 different subherds within 390, 312. And we get a lot of elk movement back and forth, depending on the time of the year, between 312, 390, 390, 393, 312, 393. And even the Region 4 hunting district, 451, certain times of the year, those elk out of either 393 or 390 will move into 451 as well. So as I mentioned, hunting district 390 is currently within the same elk management unit as those other districts. And that kind of relates back to that old 16-mile creek elk study, and even what we're seeing with the current radio collar effort there, those collars were put out, like say, in the Horseshoe Hills area. But we do get some movement back and forth, obviously on the south end of 391 and the north end of 390. But for the most part, we feel that those 390 elk were more strongly tied to that, the rest of the bridgers there in 312 and 393. We also have some overlapping landowners, landowners that own property. You mentioned the CA ranch, they have a portion of the ranch, I think, is actually a little bit is in 390, 312 and 390. I'm not sure if they got any in 393. I don't remember, but they may. But I know, I think it's Meadow Creek Ranch, Morgan's property. They've got property in both 390 and 393. So like I say, we do have some landowners, some of those larger landowners that own property, and 2, if not even 3 of those hunting districts that we're looking to combine. Does that kind of answer your question, Jared?
It does. I'm still concerned. I agree with you that they do move into 451, and I spent a lot of time with these elk. I do hunt up there a lot. I probably hunted 30 days this archery season so far, and I see a lot of the elk in places I go between 390 and that 391 section south of 12, and then some of 451. Now, I don't get much into 312 or 393 because a lot of that is, private in holdings there with the Bar None and some of the CA. But I guess, what I look at in 390 is it's such a distinct unit as far as property ownership goes. So it's a lot of private in holdings. And I realize that there's a lot of landowners that, are looking for herd reduction for game damage and things like that. But from what I've noticed here in 390, it just doesn't seem, I just hate to see that management unit get lost to a bigger unit, because I think it is unique. I think the herd is unique. I think there's a lot of opportunity there for some, high quality animals. I've seen that over the years. And, I've noticed this year too, that the bull to cow ratio is greatly improved, the best I've ever seen it. And I think that's thanks to some of the shoulder seasons. And I think there should also be an evaluation there as to how long that continues, because from what I've seen this year, we've had more busted up bulls. We've had a more intense rut. And from what I've witnessed, the bull to cow ratio is somewhere in the neighborhood of probably 2 to 5 at this point in time. I'm not a biologist, but I'm just going off of what I've been witnessing. So I guess I don't agree with this. I'm open to hear your opinion, but I'd rather see 390 stay as an individual unit, or combine even with the south half of 391 up to 12. I think makes more sense than combining it with that larger 312 unit. But that's my opinion, and I just wanted to hear the other side of it, why they were making these decisions. And I guess the last question I would have for you is, as a biologist, do you agree with the directive to reduce the number of HDs, or is this just a practice to try and meet the objective of the directive and combining some of these units when it may not make the most sense?
Yeah, I guess we were directed by the director's office to, where we can. And in this case, I do think the biology in regard to elk, does support this. And I strongly encourage, if you do it, Morgan pointed out the opportunity to comment there, that, to make sure, if you haven't already, to go ahead and comment on our website. I will point out, for those of you who are not familiar, obviously 390, you did mention the land ownership. There is, 312 and 393 have a lot more national forest than 390. As you mentioned, 390 is predominantly private land. There's only about 6 sections of national forest land in 390 as compared to the other 2 districts. You can see from the map, there is a lot more national forests there and everything like that. But if you got a comment, encourage you to go ahead and submit that on the, the Survey Monkey link there and everything. So we will definitely, take in consideration. Everything at this point is draft and everything.
Yep, appreciate it.
Jared, just real quick too, this is Julie. If you can reach out to Morgan or me or Adam, if you're not getting the elk reports from the brucellosis group, they do monthly updates of where the elk have been moving. It sounds like you know exactly where they do. I mean, what you described is exactly what I've seen. I was part of the crew behind some of the work we've done in the 312 side, but I'd be happy to send you some of that information. Some of that stuff's publicly available.
Okay, great. I'll look into that.
Great. Thanks for your question, Jared. And for anyone who's joined in on the phone, I believe we have one person on the phone. To be able to raise your hand, it's *9. So just to hit *9 if you got a question. Okay. So the next slide is 312 Mule Deer.
Yeah, and I'd like to take the start on this, but I'll lean on Michael and Adam as needed. This is one I've already received a lot of public comment on, and I'm glad. Things are changing, and there's lots of different ways we can do this. I'll explain to you what I've proposed and why. We can't have portions anymore. The Bridger Mule Deer special buck area was a portion of 312. So lacking that, I was faced with, what do? If we have to combine these districts, going limited buck for the entire new combination would pretty major change. And a lot of this district is private land. So if we made the special buck area so that if you had a buck permit, you could hunt on the forest, and if you don't, you can't, that is close to what we had as the existing portion. It is the closest way I could figure out to keep this special buck management area. And given CWD, and we're going to talk a lot tonight about mule deer management and CWD, is there was a positive detection in the north part of District 309, really close to the boundary 312, but a detection, and we sampled really heavy as hard as we could the next year and came up with none. So although CWD is probably on the landscape, it's probably not a huge deal yet. So although I completely agree that managing for older age class bucks in an area where CWD is prevalent, we would have to readdress everything. But right now, I'd like to see us retain this special buck opportunity. I think it's a great opportunity for hunters to get an above average buck near Bozeman. But like I say, if we can't manage it by a portion, we ought to be creative. And so I came up with the idea here and I ran it by a bunch of folks. If we do it as Forest Service only, there'll be some loss to hunters who hunt mule deer and the bangtails. And there will be some differences because now on private land that used to be in the portion, those landowners will be able to hunt bucks on the General A license. So this is going to change things, but it's a way to maintain special buck opportunity near Bozeman. There may be other ways. And I encourage folks to weigh in the comments. We're going to be looking at those comments. So that explains, I think, what's going to happen with the special Bridger buck tag. You'll still be able to hunt on your general tag bucks, not on forest land. So you can hunt DNRC, BLM, private land. And then as far as the mule deer B licenses go, there were only 50 mule deer B licenses. They used to be valid in all of 312. But just that national forest alone couldn't sustain the level of B licenses that have been present in 390 and 393, where we have a high level of B licenses for, particularly to help landowners in areas where there's a lot of mule deer concentrated. So as a result, those B licenses won't be valid on national forest land. But Adam and Michael could speak more to the mule deer doe situation in 390 and 393 if needed.
The next slide is 312 whitetail. So we can cover that one and then we'll come back for questions.
And again, I'll take a stab at it, but Adam and Michael, please weigh in. The 398 I already addressed a little bit when we talked about 311 and 309. This is, again, in order to not have 3 different LPTs for whitetail in the Bozeman area, let's have one LPT, license permit type, for the whole Bozeman area, 311 and then the whole new 312. But concerns from Adam and Michael in particular about the whitetail levels in 390 and 393 indicated that they don't think those populations would really be ready for a 5 per hunter. So reducing that to 2 per hunter and allowing the large area of them being valid. So that's a balance that still allows some landowner opportunity to defray areas of whitetail concentration and damage while hopefully not going too far afield by allowing too many whitetail deer B licenses. Any other bio want to add in or any questions?
Adam, I see you've got your hand raised. Did you have something to add on that one?
That was a mistake of a click.
Okay. Well, any questions from folks on anything on Hunting District 312? All right, question from Jared. Go ahead, Jared.
Thanks again. Morgan, can you just clarify the B mule deer licenses again?
I'll let Julie do that. Could you clarify the other B licenses, Julie?
Yeah, can you go back at the one slide so we can have it in front of us? And really for 390, I'd love for Adam to answer your question, Jared. For me in 312, we have a couple areas where mule deer can be pretty concentrated. But given the population of Bozeman, we have 800 throughout 300 B licenses, we'd probably chase a whole lot of deer out of the Bridger range. And that's why we want the B licenses to not be valid on forest. So they will be valid on private, they will be valid on DNRC, BLM, just not on the forest. That number 300 B license came from the sum of what existed in 312, 390, and 393. And so I don't know, Adam, would you like to discuss anything? Or Jared, did that clean it up for you, or do you have any other questions about that?
No, sorry, I missed the total B licenses and where that number came from. So that's just a combination of 312, 390, 393.
Oh, correct. Oh, and I'm glad you asked the question because I don't think I specifically hit on the bullet point that, so no longer will we have the 390 B license, the 393 B license, and the 312 B license. It's going to be kind of one big happy 312 B license valid for the whole district with that restriction. And
Okay.
that's part of the reducing the LPTs as per direction.
Okay, that makes sense. And I don't have a good idea of what the mule deer herd is like in 312 or 393. I just know in 390 it's been significantly waning in the last 5 or 6 years. So I just want to make sure there was no further allocations above where we were before.
Nope, it shouldn't be any higher, but it's always, I always like when I hear that feedback from the folks that are living and working and hunting in the areas that we manage, because like many of us have said, when we go to hunter harvest surveys with these larger districts, it'll be harder to know a little bit about the local conditions of what's going on in 390 versus 312. It's part of the trade-offs of having a bigger district, the benefit being, simplicity. And one of the challenges being, like what you just said, you have a very local idea of what you see. And so keeping in good communication will be really great.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And that's just what concerns me about the larger district, because I still do feel like 390 is really unique for mule deer and for elk.
Yeah, and I'll chime in here. In regard, for those of you who are not aware, anything like that 300 B licenses there, anything that is a quota that you see a number associated with in the biennial season regulations, we biologists in the department, we set quotas on an annual basis. For deer, elk, we typically set those quotas right before the antlerless drawing in June. If it's like a buck or a bull permit, we set those quotas right before that drawing in April. So we do have the ability. Normally, we'll set a quota number, then there's a range that we have, and as long as we're within that range, we can make a change on an annual basis without going through commission approval and everything. If we make a change outside of that range, then we have to go through a commission approval. But I just wanted to make folks aware that those quotas, we can adjust those. Even if we set a number now, if our surveys this winter or next spring showed a significant either decrease or increase in deer, we would still be able to make a change to that number prior to the 2022 hunting season and everything.
Okay. Thanks, Adam.
Hey, Morgan, this is Michael. I just want to make one clarification on mule deer. So just wanted to point out that with this combination, the mule deer B permit or license, which is currently valid in 393, is only valid in a portion of 393 south of Willow Creek. With this combination, that portion would go away. And so those new B licenses would be valid throughout all of what is currently 393 and the other 2 hunting districts as well.
Thanks for the clarification, Michael. Okay. Seeing no other questions, we'll move on to Hunting District 13.
Okay, thanks, Morgan. This is Michael. I'm the biologist in Livingston. So 313 for elk. We're looking at pretty minor changes here. So the direction was to eliminate permits for antlerless elk, so that permits would only be valid for limited entry bull permits. And so 313 had 2 antlerless elk permits, which we're proposing to eliminate and replace those with a single elk B license instead of an antlerless elk permit. So the total number for that new elk B license would be 60, which is the sum of the 30 for each of the current antlerless elk permits. The next change for 313 is another minor one, just to remove the first choice only requirement for the 313 bull permit. And this is just simplifies the reading of the regulations because this drawing is sold out on first choice already, so that this requirement isn't really having any impact on the drawing. And then I just wanted to point out it's not a change, but it is a little different than the larger direction to eliminate portions, proposing to retain the portion of 313 north of Dome Mountain WMA. And so that's that in the map here, the private land portion in that very northern corner of 313 up near 317, where currently hunters that draw the 317 antlerless B license for elk can harvest elk in that portion of 313 during the shoulder season, which runs through February 15th. And so, go ahead, somebody. Sorry, I must be getting an echo. So in terms of biology, not really expected to have any major impacts here with the proposed changes. They're largely just relabeling of existing opportunities. So are there any questions on 313 for elk?
All right, Michael, I'm not seeing any. So we'll go to 314.
Okay, so we're going to jump across the river here to 314. So there are some proposed changes here for elk. And so that the major change is just to eliminate the portion, the southern portion of 314 and include it with the whole unit for 314. So this is in line with the direction to eliminate portions. And so we would allow bull or antlerless harvest throughout the unit on a general license and antlerless harvest on the B license throughout the unit. So this is a proposal that's made purely to comply with the direction to eliminate portions. The southernmost, very southern portion of 314 does have elk that are below objective as outlined in the elk plan. But my expectation is that access to those private parcels or very relatively remote portions of public land will limit the antlerless harvest in the very southern portion of 314. Questions on 314 elk?
Okay, not seeing any questions on 314 elk. We're about halfway through our presentation tonight, and we've had a couple of folks join in as we go on. So just want to recap for folks who just joined in. If you have questions tonight on any of these proposals, please click raise hand, or you can enter those questions in the chat. Or if you're calling in on a phone, it's *9 to raise your hand. If you have comments or feedback on proposals, we ask that you submit those via the website at fwp.mt.gov so that we can capture and record those comments accurately. So with that, we'll move on to 314 and 317 for whitetail.
Okay, so this is another minor change. So unlike the elk and mule deer populations in this sort of Paradise Valley area, the whitetail are by and large confined to the valley bottom in that riparian and agricultural areas. And there's substantial exchange between these two districts. And so the biology supports managing these whitetail at the level of both 314 and 317. And that's currently what is allowed on the 31700B license. So all this is a proposal to rename that to an administrative number, which should help reduce some confusion from hunters who think that that this license can only be used in 317 just because of the number associated with it. So there wouldn't be any change in the total number of B licenses. It's just a relabeling. So pretty simple on this one.
Any questions on this slide from folks? Okay, seeing none. Next one.
Okay, so if we talk 317 for elk, so currently 317 has a limited quota B license, which is valid during the shoulder season, the late shoulder season through February 15th. The proposal here is to eliminate that elk B license and allow antlerless elk harvest on the general license during that shoulder season. So the rationale here is that elk numbers have been trending up in this area, and so more liberalized West harvest is warranted given the upward trend of elk numbers wintering in the area in relation to the 317 objective. And this would offer some simplification as well, because there has been confusion among hunters who don't understand why they can't use their general license in this shoulder season currently, when most other shoulder seasons across the state don't have a special limited quota B license. So any questions on that one?
All right, Michael, thank you. Not seeing any questions on this one. Next one is over in Vanna's territory.
Hey, this is Vanna Bacadori, for those of you that don't know. So I'll just give briefly an overview of how I proceeded with looking at proposed changes and simplifications in the units that I manage. I have 7 deer and elk hunting districts, and you'll see with my proposals tonight that basically combined 3 sets of 2. So it results in get these proposals go through 4.
Hey, Vanna, we're having a little trouble hearing you.
Okay, is
You
this
can slide
better?
close to the mic and talk a little louder.
All right, how's this?
That's a little better.
Okay. So this first proposal is with hunting district 319 and 341. And the proposal is to combine these 2 hunting districts into one district, and it would be called 319. That combination would apply to elk, mule deer, whitetail deer, and lions. And possibly in the future, antelope could fall in there too, but I haven't figured out all those details yet. So regarding elk, these 2 districts are currently managed the same way. They're Gallatin bull and the general license with some B tags. So combining them would be a change in management for either district. For whitetail deer, there'd be no change either. It's either sex on the general license for whitetail deer. Regarding lions, these 2 districts are currently managed as one lion management unit, so there would not be a change there. Where there would be a change would be with the mule deer regulation. Right now, 341 is mule deer buck, the general license with some B tags. And in 319, it is an unlimited mule deer buck license. I see there's just a note from Marina that she still can't hear me very well. How am I coming through for everybody else? Okay, I'm gonna assume that I'm coming through okay. So regarding mule deer, the proposal would be to put 341 and 319 into an unlimited mule deer buck structure, and then have a limited number of B licenses. The reason for this is that the buck to doe ratio in 341 has been less than 10 bucks per 100 does for the past 3 years. And so according to our current adaptive harvest plan for mule deer management, that is in line with the calls for. And also both of these districts are backyard districts, right outside the door for Butte and Anaconda. And so they do receive a lot of hunting pressure, and it is relatively high harvest in both of the districts, but more so in 341 with that general license. So that's why I have a proposal out to put both districts into an unlimited permit regulation for and then have a limited number of licenses. Are there any questions on that?
Any questions for Vanna on Hunting District 319? All right, your audio is still just a little quiet, Vanna. So we'll just watch the chat closely if people have questions as they come up. So.
Okay, and I'll try to get right up to the mic.
Thanks. Okay, I've not seen any questions on 319. So we'll move on to 320 elk.
Thanks, Morgan. Can you hear me all right?
You're coming in great, Dean.
Great. Good evening, folks. My name is Dean Walty. I'm the wildlife biologist in Sheridan. So the proposal for what would be the new Hunting District 320, in addition to what Julie Cunningham has already presented, which would be moving what is currently the northeast portion of Hunting District 333, the London Hills, Sappington area into 311. I'm recommending combining Hunting Districts 320 and the remaining portion of Hunting District 333 into one. From a biological perspective, this would move this hunting district to what has long been understood as the Gravelly Elk Management Unit, which has an elk management objective. It would also focus the hunting district more on the core portion of the Tobacco Roots mountain range. In terms of harvest regulations on this one, it would not result in a lot of change for either elk or deer. The regulations for both species have been common between the districts most years, going back a lot of years. From an elk perspective, I would recommend maintaining the existing brow tine bull or antlerless general license structure, which has been in place since the early 2000s in both districts, and also creating a Hunting District 320 specific antlerless B license that would be valid only outside of National Forest Service land, and would have a quota range that we could adjust annually as needed, depending on annual surveys relative to population objectives. From the perspective of the elk population objective, when the objective for the Tobacco Roots EMU was established, there were only a few dozen elk being observed in that portion that we would look to move to Hunting District 311. So the objective was based more on elk in this proposed area. Currently, there's 400 to 600 elk, so a substantial proportion of that objective in that northeast corner. In regards to mule deer, I would recommend maintaining the general license either sex structure, which has been in place in both those districts since 2016, and has been part of an ongoing effort to evaluate mule deer population response to an either sex regulation across a portion of southwest Montana. And with that, I would look to continue to monitor that population response to that either sex regulation. With that, I'd take any questions.
All right, I'm not seeing any questions on 320 elk, so we'll move on to 320 deer.
I think for the most part, I covered mule deer. In terms of whitetail, would look to maintain a general license, either sex regulation in both districts. Continue to allow the 003-00 Region 3 antlerless bee license to be valid in the districts, and maintain both districts as part of the existing 399-00 antlerless bee license bundle, which would also be valid in proposed hunting districts 302, 322, 329, 340, and 360. And that license does have a per hunter cap that we can adjust annually depending on harvest need, and may range from 1 to 5 per hunter annually. And one more note, we have detected chronic wasting disease in quite a few whitetail deer in hunting district 320. So chronic wasting disease is certainly on our minds as we think about cervid management in this hunting district moving forward.
Great, thank you, Dean. Any questions from anyone on hunting district 320? Okay, we will move on to 321.
Okay, hopefully you can hear me all right. So
Yeah, much better.
Yeah, I switched my laptop. So 321 is similar to 319, where I'm proposing to combine current hunting districts 334 and 321 into one district. 10 years ago, 11 years ago, I split 321 into these two districts as they currently are now. Now I'm proposing just to put them back into one. And this is in the upper Big Hole Valley. For elk, the change would really be seen in 334. Currently, the hunting season structure in 321 is 5 weeks of brow tine bull antlerless on the general license, plus some additional B tags. In 334, it is brow tine bull only on the general license. If these two districts get combined into one, the proposal as it stands right now is to go with the liberal season. So it would be 5 weeks of brow tine bull antlerless on the general license that would apply across these two districts, and a limited number of B tags available. It's important to know in both of these districts that they are actually elk summer range. The elk population that is in 321, they winter in Salmon, Idaho area. And then the population that's in 334 winters in the East Fork of the Bitterroot primarily. So given that, the fact that they migrate out of that valley and in getting to winter range, they have to climb up to 9,000 or 10,000 feet to get over a pass. They generally, these elk populations in both 334 and 321 don't stick around very long in the valley. And as soon as we get first significant snow, they're out of there. And that generally happens by the first week of November. So what is a 5-week season for the rest of us really is about a 10-day season in 321 and 334. And so for that reason, there's already a level of protection built into not over harvesting, I should say, because there's really just, a week to 10 days of a liberal season in all reality. Because once those elk leave the valley, they all leave. And it's only orphaned calves and wounded elk that are still in the valley in 321, 334. The other important thing to note, though, is that land ownership and hunter access is different between those two districts. In 321, there is a lot of hunter access, whether it's on private land or on public land. In 334, there's not as much access to private land. And so that could be a consideration for some folks, that if that area goes to a liberal opportunity, there might be some congestion in some parts of 334. So that is a proposed change for elk, and I'll just quickly go through mule deer because it's the same reason. I'm proposing to go to either sex archery and general season and remove any B tags. Same pattern, mule deer migrate out of there, and they usually do that earlier than the elk. So general season, when it comes to mule deer, in all of the big hole, is only about 1 week at best. And so if I go to an either sex season, both for archery and general season, I really don't think we're going to over harvest. Currently, we're probably getting 20 to 35 animals taken out of each district. And I don't think that will change very much if we had a general season opportunity. It's not a place that has a high population of mule deer, and it's not a go-to destination for folks to hunt mule deer. So I really don't think that we will see any change in the harvest with this season structure. So with that, I'll entertain any questions for 321 and 334.
Vanna, we did have one question for 321 from Ter. I hope I'm saying that right. He says, so there would be a decrease in the number of elk B from 200 to 100?
Yeah, so let me refer back to what Adam said earlier. These quotas, as I'm putting them in here right now, are somewhat placeholders, and we can make adjustments prior to the start of next season based on population counts when I do surveys. These are summer surveys. I fly in the big hole in July, and so I could adjust that number accordingly, depending on what I'm counting in both those hunting districts. But the other point that I did want to speak to is because 334 is currently not in a liberal season, and if we went to a liberal season there, I want to offset some of the antlerless harvest that may have happened on a B license by offsetting what's going to happen on the general license by reducing the number of B tags potentially. So hopefully that answered your question.
Thanks, Vanna.
Okay.
Any other questions on 321? All right, seeing none, we'll move on.
Okay. Hello again. This is Dean Walty, wildlife biologist in Sheridan. Going to discuss the proposal for hunting district, what would be hunting district 322. The simple description of this would be combining 7 hunting districts that currently make up the Gravelly Elk Management Unit into one district. This recommendation is based much on what we've learned in regards to how elk use this landscape through what has become a pretty long and rich history of radio color research. And that work is showing that the majority of elk across this landscape don't use any one of these hunting districts in their annual home range or in their migrations between summer and winter habitats. Most of them use at least 2 of these, and some of them use up to 6 of them as they move between summer and winter ranges. There are a couple of localized herds in Northern Hunting District 322 and Northern Hunting District 325 that spend a lot of their time within one district, but even those are showing some overlap with neighboring districts and certainly overlap with those majority migratory elk. From a elk regulations perspective, this really wouldn't change much. Elk have been managed at this scale since the early 2000s through common regulations across all 7 of these hunting districts. It's been primarily a brow tine bull or antlerless general license regulation since 2004. I'm recommending that we maintain that regulation for the time being. And then we also, for the past several years, have had an elk B license that was valid in this and a couple other elk management units. That is the 399-00 B license, valid for antlerless elk. I'm recommending that we maintain that license be valid across this new district. It would also remain valid in new hunting districts 302 and 303. Would recommend an initial quota of 500, which is a little less than what it currently is. And then again, with this, we would have a quota range that we could adjust within annually depending on harvest need. With that, any questions regarding this proposal from an elk perspective?
We got 2 questions in the question and answer box. We're going to take Kyle's first because I believe it pertains to this proposal, Dean. Kyle's question is, do they use all those districts under the course of the hunting season or over the entire year? Shouldn't elk districts be relevant over the course of the hunting season?
Thanks, Kyle. It's a mix of both. Certainly throughout the year between summer and winter ranges, we know elk utilize multiple hunting districts. The timing of a lot of that movement from summer range to winter range during the fall is driven entirely by snow accumulation and the timing of it. So there are hunting seasons where we get snow during late October, November that facilitates elk bunching up and moving towards winter range. During those years, those elk are crossing several of these hunting districts within the hunting season. And in some cases, they may vacate the southern portion of this elk management unit during the hunting season. In those years, that's when we see relatively high elk harvest in this elk management unit. In other hunting seasons, when we don't get snow prior to the end of the season, that facilitates initiation of that migration, which has been the case since 2015. These elk don't move across as many hunting districts, but they still move across those lines locally quite frequently.
Okay, thanks, Dean.
I I see another question, Morgan, regarding a decrease in B licenses.
Yeah.
That that would be correct. We are with this proposing to reduce those B licenses by some, and that is influenced much by we would be reducing the area that 399-00B license is valid for. One instance would be it would not be valid in hunting district 3, the existing hunting district 320 anymore. My recommendation is for that Tobacco Roots EMU to have a B license specific to it. We would also be recommending removing the 399-00B license as being valid across the Pioneer Elk Management Unit, or what would be the new hunting district 329. So it would be valid across a smaller area and likely fewer people applying for those.
Thanks, Dean. And before we get to Cammie's question, Chris also sent in a question in the chat that asks, what happens with the Wall Creek management area?
Yep. Jump slides if you would, Morgan.
Sure.
So within this, I am recommending that we do maintain the special management area that pertains to the Wall Creek Wildlife Management Area. Currently, there is an area on and in proximity to the Wildlife Management Area where we maintain some cap on the number of hunters that can harvest an elk there at any one time. This is the result of a history of, in years when we get snow, large numbers of elk ending up on the Wall Creek Wildlife Management Area during the rifle season. They end up between the public roadway across the WMA and the river, and hunters often trap them there, and it's had a history of flock shooting events and some hunter safety concerns out there. So for the past 10 or 12 years, we have maintained a limited number of licenses that are valid in that area. For a point in time, it was a license specific to it. 4 years ago, I made the move to make the 399-00 elk B license valid there. In this, I'm recommending, one, maintaining that special hunt area for the reasons described, and two, maintaining the 399-00B license is the license that's valid there.
Thanks, Dean. Okay, before we move on to Hunting District 322 for deer, want to check and make sure if there's any more questions specific to 322 for elk, which I'm not seeing any that have come in. And then Cammie has a question that's not specific to one area, more just for the biologist. Her question is, can the biologist talk a little bit about how you use the stats from the hunter harvest surveys, and if there's a concern about the stats becoming less precise with larger hunting district areas? And is there any talk or movement toward more specific hunt harvest location survey questions to increase valuable location specific information for herd management? And lastly, or is there any talk of mandatory harvest reporting for hunters? So I'll let the biologist speak to that.
I'd be happy to take the first part of that question. Absolutely, the consideration of possibly losing resolution of where we would collect hunter harvest information for in terms of making hunting districts larger has been something we've considered a lot. And even right now, biologists are considering, do we need to make some changes to maintain that finer scale of harvest information for future management recommendations. It's certainly been on my mind, and in my proposals, as part of that I have considered the value of, in these expansions of hunting districts, maintaining boundaries that are existing hunting district boundaries by combining entire hunting districts. And one thing that we'll do is maintain comparative historic data sets for the larger district. But we certainly may lose some resolution at how harvest is distributed across those larger hunting districts. Personally, I do collect a lot of harvest location information at check stations that I work, and that's another form of data that I'll have. There's certainly ongoing talks within the new licensing system of adding some capability for collecting harvest location information. But I don't know where that's at. Morgan, do you know where those conversations are?
No, I haven't heard an update on that component.
And I'm not aware of any significant discussions about a mandatory reporting for all big game species in Montana.
All right, thanks for taking that one, Dean. Did any of the other biologists have anything to add on that one? Okay.
Yeah, this Adam, I'll chime in. The department does have a harvest survey working group that's comprised, I believe, like a representative biologist for all 7 regions. They typically meet, if I remember right, sometime in the spring, early summer. So in regard to that second question, that could be something that, with I think kind of what Dean said, most of us recognize that we could lose, some of that information by combining hunting districts and going to a larger geographic area. So, that working group could potentially, take something on or maybe bring something forward to try to get more specific hunter harvest information. And as Dean mentioned, there's, the mandatory harvest report comes up periodically. At this point, the department's not looking at going that route. There are issues. Currently, our harvest survey it's a sampling effort. We're sampling hunters. If you go to a mandatory harvest, you are basically taking a census, and that requires everybody to report. So there's issues with the statistics if you get people that do not report. So anyway, there's different statistics involved there between whether you're sampling a population or if you're censusing a population. But I'd like to say at this point, even though there's been a lot of discussion, the department's not looking at this point to going to mandatory harvest reporting.
Thanks, Adam. Okay, we'll move on to Hunting District 322 for deer.
So the proposal to expand to the elk management unit scale and move to the proposed hunting district 322 hunting district would force a change, at least across a portion of the district, for mule deer in terms of harvest regulations. The reason being is across those 7 hunting districts, there's currently 3 different mule deer regulations. Hunting districts 323 and 327 currently have a general license buck only hunting regulation. Hunting district 324 has a limited buck permit regulation. And hunting districts 322, 326, 325, and 330 have a general license either sex regulation. My recommendation from very much a biological perspective is to expand the general license either sex regulation across the proposed hunting district 322. So that would eliminate the limited buck permit in hunting district 324 and add an antlerless harvest opportunity on the general license in 323 and 327. This recommendation is based principally on what we've learned monitoring population response to an either sex regulation in those districts where it's been in place the last several years. And we now know that chronic wasting disease is present within this proposed hunting district. It's been detected in hunting districts 322, 326, and 324. It's to date been detected only in whitetail deer. We did learn this afternoon, we had our first moose CWD positive in this area. So we now know it's moved into moose. Given the seasonal overlap between these whitetail deer, where we have relatively high prevalence and a high number of deer and migratory populations of elk and mule deer, I'm confident it's going to move into elk and mule deer soon, if not already. And then also know that those whitetail deer that are harboring CWD in that Ruby watershed, they do move right to the headwaters of the Ruby River during the summer and fall, at least a portion of them do. So CWD is likely very well distributed across hunting district 324 already. All the science to date suggests if we are hopeful in maintaining chronic wasting disease at low prevalence that's not expected to have population level impacts on deer and elk in the future. Current science suggests that's about 5% prevalence. Our best approach currently is detect it early, which is something we've done with mule deer and elk, and then implement harvest regulations that facilitate buck-focused harvest, maintain relatively low compositions of bucks, and buck populations that are relatively young. So given that chronic wasting disease is in this district, it's already pretty well distributed. I think soon it'll be across this entire district and all 4 cervid species in there. I'm recommending that we don't expand a limited permit for buck mule deer across this district and even move away from it in hunting district 324. With that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, not seeing any questions on 322 for deer. We'll move on to 329 for elk. So not sure if this one's Vanna or Jesse.
It's Jesse.
My apologies, I still have my mute on. So this proposal is largely built around the Pioneer Elk Management Unit, which currently spans hunt districts 329, 331, and 332. It does grab a bit of 328, and maybe I'll just discuss this kind of more modest addition at the beginning here. So as I pointed out with 302, half of 328 was going to be absorbed into 302 and the other half into 329. And this was based primarily on collar data, both from the elk that were collared in the Tendoy area by Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and elk from Idaho. And while there's a fair bit of crossover between that horse prairie drainage, a lot of the movements do follow north and south from the west side of 328 up into 329. So this seemed an easy way to incorporate our better understanding of elk movements into this district simplification. The more dramatic change would be combining 329, 331, and 332. While these do make up one elk management unit, the management has varied over time between the districts, particularly between 329 and the Pioneer districts. It does reflect elk movements largely. A lot of the Pioneer area, there's a substantial portion of those elk that move down south into 329 during the winter and then back north during the summer. So it would capture elk movements well. That being said, it is recognized that there are a portion of elk that do reside in those Pioneer districts and winter on the skirts of the Pioneers. Under this proposal, we would expand the brow-tine bull and antlerless elk harvest throughout this district. Currently, the Pioneer districts are managed with a split season. For the first 2 weeks, you can harvest an antlerless elk. This would expand antlerless opportunity. In order to counterbalance that, we would be removing the 399 elk B license, so as not to add that additional B license harvest onto this. Potential issue at some point would be the need to balance the desire for more elk in the Pioneers with over objective elk in that 329 area, in the current 329 area. Based on long-term data from the Pioneers, I believe they can handle antlerless elk harvest. That population's been basically stable for going back into the 1980s. Of course, counts vary from year to year, but overall it's been stable. And in the past 10 years, we've seen growth of roughly 5% annually throughout the whole elk management unit, with about over 5% growth in that Hunt District 331 and maybe up to 2% growth in 332. Despite the fact that those northern districts right now are low enough to trigger more restrictive harvest, those districts have basically ridden in that low range of the quota since the 1980s. I don't foresee a large change in that. And a lot of the elk, particularly in 332, do leave that district during the hunting season as the hunting season progresses. There will be a loss of data to monitor changes in that population via the hunting statistics. Some of that can be compensated by information from hunter check stations, and the annual winter surveys will not change. So we can still block out different portions of the district and look at elk counts in those to evaluate if we're having any negative or positive effect on the population. And are there any questions concerning elk?
All right, Jesse, we've got a couple of questions on this one. Dugan asks, no more elk be licensed in 329. Would broadtime bull and antlerless be valid for both archery and rifle with a general license?
Yes, that's correct. It would be.
And another question, do you have any availability of data, the number of cows currently harvested in these districts?
Yeah. The harvest of cows in 329 is pretty modest. Sorry, 331 is pretty modest. It's about, so 332, the long-term antlerless harvest there, about 112 animals with past 10 years averaging about 99. That's the low end of those districts. 331, the antlerless harvest has averaged 134 over the long term and has been about 120 in the past 10 years. And in 329, we have the substantial antlerless harvest. It's grown particularly in the past 10 years. The long-term average is 226 antlerless, and in the past 10 years, 252. Understand those are estimates based on the hunter harvest statistics, and there is a certain amount of error associated with all those numbers.
Thanks for those numbers, Jesse. And one more question. Are there any foreseen negative impact on overall elk numbers within these hunting districts?
I don't foresee any. As I said, those districts, the concern would probably come with the pioneer districts, the West Pioneers and East Pioneers. But those numbers have been largely stable over varying amounts of antlerless harvest and bee tags. And at least currently, they seem to be growing. A lot of those animals that are in the pioneers in the early part of the season will end up in 329 their severity, where they're subject to antlerless harvest later in the season anyway. The goal of trying to get those pioneer districts up closer to objective over the long term just might not be realistic. They rarely approach those objectives in the past 40 years. And currently, it's hard to say if the landscape could support that many more elk. We already have a high number of conflicts in the pioneers in wintertime with private landowners. And a lot of those elk have opted to move down into 329 to winter. So I do not believe there would be negative population consequences, but again, we will not have the resolution and harvest data, but the survey data, the resolution will not change. And so we can monitor that. And if we believe we're having a negative impact with that extra antlerless harvest, we can pull back and make it more restrictive.
All right. Thank you, Jesse. And thank you for the questions, everyone. Just to kind of give you an update on where we're at with the presentation, we've got about 19 more slides to go. So thanks for bearing with us as we kind of go a little bit past 2 hours. We've got a lot of proposals in Region 3. One more question just came through. It says, is removing the elk bee license in these hunting districts focused on maintaining a healthy population of elk?
The motivation to remove the 399 elk license was just the recognition that we would be seeing additional harvest of antlerless elk in those pioneer districts. And I felt it was in the best interest to go slowly in adding that additional harvest instead of putting the 399 tag on top of a general season antlerless tag. Did that answer your question?
I say thank you. So I believe we covered it. Thanks for the question, Dugan. All right. Next up, 329 mule deer.
Okay. In the interest of time, I'll try to cover this relatively quickly. So with the redistricting of 329 for elk, of course, that forces changes on deer as well. And in this case, we would be combining these areas for mule deer and whitetail deer, and that would entail extending the either sex general season mule deer tag into 332. Since 2016, we have had antlerless mule deer harvest on the general tag in hunt districts 328, 329, 331. This is part of a larger effort to implement either sex management of mule deer and monitor it very closely in terms of the population consequences. We have not seen at this time negative population consequences of going to either sex general season. I don't foresee the extension of the either sex license into Hunt District 332 as having negative population consequences based on what we've seen in other districts, but also some of the features unique to 332. Most of those deer head out of that country relatively early in the season. We have data from callers from Idaho that summer up in that 332 country, and they're leaving in September or October. They're just not subject to that much harvest pressure. A lot of the deer that do summer in 332 will end up in 329 and 331 where they're already subject to antlerless harvest. 332 is not a destination mule deer area. It has in general very low harvest. The buck harvest is estimated to be somewhere between 30 and 50 animals a year. That's similar to 328, where we also have low mule deer buck harvest. If you look at the antlerless harvest after 328 went into the either sex management, it has remained negligible. And I do not foresee a large number antlerless deer being harvested in 332 based on this. And again, the one thing that does give me pause is we will lose resolution in that harvest data to look at harvest specific to 332. To compensate for that, we intend to look very closely at check station data out of Divide and Darby, and maybe an additional check station area to get a better handle on what that harvest looks like in 332 after going to either sex management. Are there any questions about that, or can we move on?
And we do have one more slide on this district for mule deer.
Yeah, I think I actually
I think you
covered this in what I was just discussing, so we could probably move on if there's no questions.
Okay, I'm not seeing any questions on this one.
And this goes quickly. This would just extend the 399 antlerless whitetail tag to the entire district. And again, that's largely motivated by the expansion of whitetail into many of these areas and concerns about the effects on mule deer and other cervids.
Okay, not seeing any questions. We'll keep going.
Alrighty, this is Adam Grove, the Townsend area biologist. I'm going to be covering our Helena area biologist, Jenny Sika's district tonight, as she was unable to be with us. So for 335, the proposal is to combine the existing hunting districts 318 and 335 for deer elk into would be a new hunting district 335, and would convert the existing 394 brow-tine bull antlerless elk permit. That's permit is valid in multiple hunting districts. They would change that elk permit to an elk B license. For those of you who are not familiar, elk permits go with a general license, so you have to use it in combination with a general license. Or an elk B license is just that, it's a totally separate license. So individuals, it would allow, if somebody wanted to, they could harvest both a bull and a cow on separate licenses in this hunting district, as compared in the past with the antlerless permit. They would either have had to have shot either a bull or a cow. They wouldn't have potentially been able to harvest both. Looking at the biology of this district, the two existing districts do have biological differences. There are the bull to cow ratios are different. In regard to mule deer, overall mule deer numbers and distribution are different, and the habitat is likely limiting mule deer abundance in hunting district 318. And I believe is 318, is that your district, Vanna?
No, that's Jenny's as well.
That is also Jenny's. Okay, I'm sorry. Anyway, I'll try to answer any questions related to this if folks have any. Otherwise, Jenny sounds like she'll be back in the office next week. If somebody's got a real detailed question or whatever, I'd ask that you reach out to her sometime next week.
Okay, I'm not seeing any questions come in on this one. So we'll move to 339.
This is another one of Jenny's districts. This is the proposal is to retain the current 339 boundary and the limited either sex permit structure. We would propose to eliminate the antlerless mule deer license, or she's actually throwing out a couple options here. Excuse me. Another option would be create an antlerless mule deer license opportunity that would be valid across both hunting districts 339 and 343. And that would use an administrative number, kind of what we've talked about earlier. There's issues if you have a multiple district license and you assign it to one of those hunting district numbers. A lot of times that results in people automatically reporting their harvest to that hunting district, even though it may be harvested in one of the other hunting districts where the license is valid. And again, we would convert the 396 antlerless permit from spike antlerless, that would be converted to an antlerless elk B license that would be valid in hunting districts 339 and 343, or they could continue to use an administrative number, or another option would be to create separate antlerless elk B licenses for both 339 and 343 with a proposed quota of 150 in 339 and somewhere in the range of 100 to 150 for 343. In regard to the biology, again, for retaining the boundary in the either sex structure, 339 does have that limited either sex elk permit, and our current elk plan calls for an objective of having a minimum average age of 5.5 years for bull elk for the bull elk that are harvested with that limited either sex elk permit. Again, any questions or anything?
All right, not seeing any questions on this one. Oh, it's on. So Cammie wants to know, do you know what the original biological reasoning was for combining these into a combo antlerless elk permit when the bull elk populations are managed so differently, i.e. trophy versus general tag?
Yeah, if I remember right, it was they wanted to, if somebody already had the bull permit, or had the opportunity to harvest a bull, if they had the antlerless permit, they could either, use it for the bull elk permit or for the antlerless elk, I believe is what the reasoning was. But like I say, you might reach out with Jenny next week.
Great, thanks, Adam. And yeah, if folks have questions for any specific biologists or on these hunting districts, you can submit them online as well, or you can find contact information for each biologist on those PDF documents that we showed you on the website. Kyle has another general question on the statewide changes. And he says, out of the 3 avenues of simplification, 1, B in permit changes, 2, removals of portions, and 3, combining of districts, can you please rank the effect on your, as biologists, ability to manage stable deer and elk populations?
I'll take a stab at that. This is Vanna, and that's a good question, Kyle. Pretty astute as well. So each of those items that you list are tools that we have available to manage populations of deer and elk and every other game animal out there. And so I certainly understand the need for some simplification. And I think if you look across the whole state, we've got lumpers and we have splitters. And I think over time, some regions, some areas have split and made things pretty complicated. That has led to a lot of comments from the general hunting public that our regulations are really hard to understand. And so, that's where some of this is coming from, to this reg simplification process that we've been engaged in here for the past several months. But there's simplification on one hand, and then there's taking tools away on another hand. And it's pretty much a fine line to have both. And so I feel like, it's just, I'm going to speak for myself, but I think the other biologists, I could say this about them as well, having been in conversations with them as we've been moving through this process, that we've been trying to walk that fine line as best as possible. And you've heard a few of us refer to it tonight of, meeting the task at hand, but not at the detriment of the management of the resource. And so, so to your question specifically, I can't rank them because it just depends on each situation, each hunting district, each population, the movement, the lay of the land with regard to ownership and land use. But they all are important, and in combination, they are tools in our toolbox for sound management. So I don't know if that answered your question or much more than you wanted, but that was my stab at it.
Thank you, Vanna. And I'll just pause if any of the other staff have anything to add on that one. Okay. All right, thanks, folks. We'll move on to Hunting District 340.
Okay, this is Vanna again, and recognizing the late hour, I'll try to keep this brief. But my proposal with Hunting District 340 does not involve glomming on multiple districts. I am proposing to retain Hunting District 340 as it is. However, I am proposing a few changes within the current structure. Regarding the elk season structure, currently I have a split season in there where the first 2 weeks are brow tine bull antlerless on the general license, and then it goes to brow tine bull only. And in addition, there are permits in there. And with the task at hand to try to minimize or remove split seasons and move away from permits, I am proposing to go to a 5-week brow tine bull season on the general license, and then offer 450 B licenses or some high number. What I'm trying to do with a high number of B licenses is take the antlerless harvest that we had on the general license in those first 2 weeks and replace it with B license, and also the permits. And the difference between the permits and the B licenses, and most of you will know this, but permits are attached to your A tag. So it's 1 elk per customer, as opposed to B licenses where hunter can have an A and a B tag. And what I have noticed in 340, because I've had both permits and B licenses, and those permits are not ever meant to be trophy bull permits. They were more cow permits, even though they were for either sex, but the majority of people who utilize them to harvest the antlerless elk. And what those permits do is it's really nice for folks that just want 1 elk. They just want to hunt in 1 area that they know well, and they just want meat in the freezer. And so I didn't notice a difference in performance between the B licenses or the permits, but I did notice the hunter number of hunters and days of field level. So with that B license, being that it's an additional tag, it does draw in a few more hunters. But as far as managing elk, I didn't notice any difference in the outcome and the hunter success. Generally, there is a 20 to 30 on a really good year fill rate on whatever level we set the quota at for B licenses or permits. So that's what I'm proposing for elk. With the mule deer, I have had for the past 3 years, and this will be the 4th year, I've had a season structure that has been pretty liberal, where it's been either sex on the general license. This is similar to what Dean and Jesse have been doing in their districts. When I put that in place, I set 3 objectives to monitor this management action, because it was a pretty liberal action to take in a hunting district like 340 that is another one of these backyard districts where it's in close proximity to Dillon, Whitehall, Butte, Anaconda. It does receive a lot of hunting pressure. And so, one of my objectives by going from mule deer buck on the general license and some limited B tags to either sex on the general license was to maintain the population, that I wouldn't see a change in the total harvest or as it reflected in the population trend over time. And then the second objective was that there would be some shifting of small buck harvest to antlerless. So I got rid of the B tags. And so folks that were out there just meat hunting, instead of being forced to take a small buck because they didn't have a B license, they now could take a doe instead of that small buck. And then over time, see a higher quality of buck out there because people, hunters in theory, were relieving pressure on the younger bucks and letting them grow up a little bit. None of those objectives have been met in the past 3 years, and not marginally either. It was by pretty significant distances that those objectives were not met. And so I am hesitant to retain that liberal season in hunting district 340. However, I will note, as Dean has been pointing out in the neighboring districts to the east, that we do have prevalence of CWD. And it is important to keep our deer populations, elk populations at a lower density. So I'm aware of that and I'm open to that consideration as well, as to whether I should or should not move out of a liberal season with mule deer. However, it's kind of a catch-22. Do I try to keep densities low that they don't get CWD, or do I kill them all off by having a liberal season? So if you have any thoughts on that, I sure would welcome hearing them. And then lastly, and real quickly, the only other change would be to change the district label for antelope. It's the same boundary as deer and elk, but for antelope, it's 341, and for deer and elk, it's 340. And the proposal would be to change the label for antelope to be 340 as well, which means that Michael's antelope 340 over in Paradise Valley will get a new number also. So I'm trying to be brief and quick. If you have any questions, I can take them now, or if you want to engage with me later on, preferably tomorrow, not tonight, I'll be happy to do that. So.
Thanks, Vanna. I don't see any pending questions on this one. So we'll move to 343. This might be one of Jenny's, is it?
Yeah, I believe Adam's covering this one.
Sorry, forgot to unmute myself. Sorry about that. So anyway, for hunting district 343, we're looking at combining a portion of hunting district 293, and I believe also possibly a small portion of 284 with hunting district 343 to create a new hunting district 343. All three of those hunting districts are currently within the same elk management unit. By making the boundary change, I believe it'll be able to more effectively manage the elk population on the 343 side. We're also looking at converting the existing 396 elk permit that's for broadtime bull antlerless in hunting district 343 and for spike or antlerless in hunting district 339. 339 is one of those districts that is a limited draw trophy bull permit. So anyway, we're looking at once again to get rid of the elk permit and changing those to elk B licenses. The elk antlerless elk B license would potentially be valid in both hunting districts 339 and 343 with a quota of 300, or the other option would be once again to create separate antlerless elk B licenses that would be valid for 343 with a quota of somewhere between 100 to 150, and in hunting district 339 the quota would be 150. For mule deer, we're looking at eliminating the mule deer B license, the 343-01 license, or create an antlerless mule deer B license that would be valid across both hunting districts 343 and 339. Then we're looking at it potentially eliminating antlerless whitetail deer harvest on a general license during the rifle season. Any kind of went through that pretty quick in the interest of time, but anybody have any questions?
Thanks, Adam. Not seeing any questions. Next up is 360.
Hi, this is Julie again. So District 360 and 362 have a shared elk herd. We've got a lot of GPS data to support that. It's been managed the same way for a lot of years, including an elk B license with the administrative number 39880. There are 500 of them. It's valid in either 360 or 362. But given all the shared uses by the same elk herd and given the same management strategies, our thought here is they would be an easy one to combine. So this is one of those examples to somebody else's question earlier, where it should be no different to the hunter, no different to the landowner, just a straight up simplification that will hopefully make management easier for everybody. So the boundary change in the Big Sky area I addressed earlier, it reflects GPS collar data to better describe the 360 herd and not the 311 or 310 herds. Any questions?
Thanks, Julie. Not seeing any questions on this one. How about for whitetail deer?
Yeah, yes, I forgot the whitetail deer addition. District 360 was incorporated in the 399 regulation. Now that 360 needs to be combined into 362, we get left with the question of whether we want to break the new 360 away or include both 360 and 362 into the 399 regulation. District 362 does not have a whole lot of whitetail. So the District 360 does, and it benefits from having this 399 package. It's been in it for 6 years, and we've had a lot of good management results. So the current thought is we'll maintain the 399 white-tailed B license in the new District 360, which would allow liberal whitetail harvest in a district where whitetail are fairly few, which is the old District 362. But that will maintain what we have in District 360 and reduce the potential growth for CWD. So there's a little bit of a trade-off as regards whitetail management with 360, although the elk management was very easy. There's the dilemma with whitetail management.
Thank you, Julie. Not seeing any questions on this slide either. So next one up is Hunting District 370.
Okay, this is Banna again. This is one where it's going to be a little bit of a break from what the directive was, but basically I've got Hunting District 350, 370. This is north of Whitehall. 370 is the Boulder Valley. 350 goes from Elk Park to the Whitetail Valley. And the boundary between the two of them is the road between Whitehall and Boulder. The proposal that I have right now is to combine these into one district and call it 370. And that would be valid for elk, mule deer, whitetail deer, mountain lion, and antelope. However, I'm basically proposing keeping the same season structure that we have in 370 and in 350. So then I am proposing that if we make this into one larger district, we have portions. We have an east and west portion, and they correspond to the current hunting districts that we have right now. And they retain the current season structure for elk that we have right now. The reason for this is that 350 has a lot more access, and 370 does. And it is obvious in the wintering elk counts that I get. The 350 population is a lot lower than in 370. And so in order to best manage these populations, I feel like I need to have a more standard package in 350. So brow time bull on the general license, plus a very limited number of B licenses, and then 5 weeks either sex with the brow time regulation for 370. Again, where access does not provide the security you need to kind of keep the harvest in check, then we need to do it through season regulation, and that's what I'm proposing. 370 already has a high level of security because of the access concerns there. And 350 does not. So I need to put a more standard package in there. So any questions on that?
Thanks, Vanna. We do have one question before we get to it. There's one more slide on this one. Just wanted to make sure there wasn't anything else you needed to cover on that.
Yeah, so that next slide was basically what I just gave in verbally. And then Brett, I'm looking at your question here.
Just for folks who may not be able to see it, I'll read Brett's question.
Oh yeah, thank you, Morgan.
He says, thank you for presentation and for the use of portions here. Under the current elk management plan or a future one, are portions typically recognized in respect to objective numbers and status? Will each portion have objectives, or could an overpopulation of the Bull Mountains offset an underpopulation in the boulders, since they would both be in 370?
So the best way I can answer that, because we're currently, as you're probably aware, rewriting the elk management plan. I guess the best answer is probably the least desirable answer, that if we do put these two together, I'm guessing that portions will not be recognized in the elk management plan. And I would not be able to retain objectives. So I guess I'm struggling a little bit, that I don't know exactly what the answer is. This is just my idea, my thoughts. I don't know how the elk management plan is going to get written, and if splitting or putting these two districts into one is going to jeopardize population in 350 and the management of it. So
one thing I can say as far as the new elk plan goes, we're currently in a stage where we're nowhere near analyzing portions or objectives or district specific. What we're doing is addressing statewide elk management objectives and goals that were set out by the Public Elk Working Group. Things that just general thoughts and ideas on elk management that the elk working group wanted to see FWP address. So we're a little ways out before looking down to the district levels.
thanks, Julie.
All right, thanks, Van and Julie, and thanks for the question, Brett. Not seeing any other questions, we'll move to Hunting District 380 for elk. And there are two slides to this one.
All righty, this is Adam again. I think you'll probably have me for the rest of this presentation. Hunting District 380 elk, I'll start with what is not changing. That is the 380-20 either sex elk permit that will be retained. What will also be retained is the general spike opportunity or the ability to harvest spikes on a general license anywhere in the hunting district. That will be retained. So moving on to what will be changed or what is being proposed to be changed under the Director's Directive, we're looking at eliminating the north and south portions of Hunting Districts 380. So that would eliminate the existing B licenses, the 380-01 and the 380-02, proposing to replace those with one B license, the 380-01, that would be valid everywhere in the hunting district except the national forest land. I also might note that we would still retain the 380-00 elk B license. That would be valid anywhere in the hunting district, including a National Forest Service. So we would go from the existing 3 elk B licenses in 380 down to 2 proposed B licenses. We'd also look at changing the existing 3-week spike bull antlerless elk season. That's currently only valid off national forest land in the defined south and north portions of the hunting district. Looking at changing that to making it a full 5-week season, and then only making that valid on making that only valid on private land. So folks wouldn't be able to utilize, or there would be no general antlerless opportunity on either Forest Service or BLM land or DNRC land in the hunting district. But again, the general antlerless opportunity would run for the full 5 weeks, but we would be valid only on private land. And then I've already touched on moving that southeast portion of hunting district 380. We already covered that under the 312 proposal and everything. So I won't touch on that. If you want to flip to the next slide. Kind of back to the biology, this is pertains to the 380-01 license and the 380, or the 5-week general antlerless opportunity. Currently, overall elk numbers in 380 have been near the top end of the objective range or slightly above in the recent past. So the new 380-01 elk be licensed and the new 5-week antlerless elk opportunity, or technically it's a spike bull antlerless elk opportunity. Again, that's only valid on private land. Those are both designed to reduce elk numbers on private lands to reduce private landowner conflicts with elk. Any questions related to elk 380?
Thanks, Adam. Not seeing any questions on this one. Next one is Mule Deer for 380.
All righty, a couple of proposed changes for 380. The first one would just be to change the language for the existing 380 Mule Deer B license. Currently, it's restricted to private land outside of the national forest land, and it's also currently valid on DNRC land. I think there's a lot of confusion on what constitutes the national forest boundary. So to simplify things, we're looking at changing that just to be an only valid on private land. So it would also no longer be valid on state school trust land or DNRC land. Also, with the directive to eliminate unlimited mule deer buck permits, we're looking at changing the unlimited mule deer buck permit to a limited draw permit. However, the proposed permit numbers would be similar to the existing unlimited permit numbers. In 380, for like the last 5 years, the average number of unlimited permits that have been issued have been just slightly below 1,300. So that's 1,300 is probably what I'd be looking at proposing for a quota for the going to a limited draw. The one difference obviously is with the limited draw that kicks in the 10% non-resident. So non-residents would be limited to 10% of that 1,300. Currently with the unlimited mule deer buck permit, there is no limitation on them for non-residents or anything like that. In regard to why we're not looking at going to a general license for mule deer bucks is currently we get about 3,200, 3,300 elk hunters in 380. It's probably the most heavily hunted elk district in the state of Montana. As I mentioned, we currently have only about 1,300 unlimited permit holders. So there's basically about 2.6 times more elk hunters than deer hunters in the hunting district. The thought process was that if we allowed all those existing elk hunters and whoever else might want to hunt mule deer bucks in the hunting district on a general license, if we allowed them opportunity, just to not feel that the mule deer population could sustain that and that there would be pretty severely negatively impacted. Any questions related to 380 mule deer?
Thanks, Adam. No questions. We'll move on to the next one.
All righty. This is another one of Jenny's districts. This is 388. This is the Helena Valley area. For the most part, in regard to elk and deer, no changes. The only change actually would be on the antelope side. She's proposing to eliminate the 388-30 Dauphin license. That just relates to limited pronghorn antelope numbers in the Helena Valley there. For those who might live in the Helena Valley area, most of 388 is a weapons restriction area. That's for human safety and everything. So, but for the most part, no changes related to that.
Okay, and not seeing any questions on this one. Next is 391.
All righty, this is one of my districts, one of the Townsend districts again. Under this proposal, we're proposing to combine the existing hunting districts 391 and 392 to form a new hunting district 391. Proposed regulations for elk for archery season, it would be brow tine bull or antlerless elk. General season structure would be 5 weeks brow tine bull with brow tine bull or antlerless elk off national forest land, i.e. there would not be valid for antlerless elk on national forest. Then the existing shoulder season in 391 that's currently in place for the area south of Duck Creek, that would be eliminated. Then we would go to one antlerless elk B license for the hunting district, which would not be valid on national forest land. The existing 389 elk B license would be eliminated. We'd also look at eliminating the separate youth and permit to hunt from vehicle seasons, which allows yearling bull or spike bull harvest opportunity. We're looking at eliminating that in part to match the hunting district 446 regulations over on the east side of the big belts. There is no opportunity to harvest spike bulls there. If you'll flip to the next slide, please, Morgan. Looking at the biology for elk, combining the existing combining the existing observed hunting districts or the observed objectives for the 2 hunting districts would yield a point objective of 1,350 elk. The current observed populations for the 2 districts combined is 1,387, if I remember correctly. So current combined observed numbers would be basically right around the new point objective. And then along with the desire to eliminate the opportunity to harvest spike elk for youth and the permit to hunt from a vehicle. We also, one of the things is we want to reduce, I jumped ahead of myself. Back to the desire for the antlerless off national forest is the desire is to continue to allow antlerless elk harvest off national forest land to address private land elk numbers while allowing elk numbers on national forest land to hopefully increase. In hunting district 391, and particularly, we've been at or actually slightly above objective the last couple of years. However, elk opportunity or elk hunting opportunity on national forest land has been pretty limited. Just we, for the most part, don't have any elk on national forest. All the elk are on national or on private land during the general rifle season. That relates to, once again, to the access opportunities on private land on those properties that hold significant numbers of elk during the general season. If you want to flip to the next slide real quick. Oops, back up, I guess. I thought there was another slide regarding elk there. Anyway, back to one of the also reasons we're looking at reducing or eliminating that youth opportunity to hunt spike elk is we implemented that license opportunity in the 2020 season. So it's been in place last year, then this year. So we only have 1 year of harvest data. But in 392, and particularly, we did see a significant reduction in yearling bulls this past winter or whatever. And that's thought likely from that opportunity to harvest spikes or whatever. So in addition to wanting to match it more with 446 season, we also are concerned about yearling bull recruitment in those 2 districts. Any questions related to the elk portion of 391?
Thanks, Adam. We do have one question, part of which I think you answered, and I'll read it from Tony. He says, in the interest of time, it may be a discussion for later, but the proposed 391 area is enormous, most of the Big Belt Mountains, too large for objectively evaluating harvest populations, etc. I would suggest that there are large differences in ownership, access, and resident elk in the current 392 district versus 391. These are not the same herds, and one mountain range does not make the same elk herd. How did the department arrive at this as being a biologically sustainable alternative for elk? And a portion which I think you did answer is, if I'm not mistaken, 392 is under objective already, and how did you justify shoulder seasons in what is formerly 391?
Yeah, and again, we would be eliminating the shoulder season as a result of the combination. And you are correct, 392 portion has been under objective, and do recognize you have lots of valid points there that there is when we redid the boundary between 391 and 392 back starting with the 2016 season. The resulting 392 district, the current 392 district, is mostly national forest land. There is a large amount of private land in 391, and obviously a lot of access issues related there. So there is some concern going forward, you know, the ability to manage elk because of that difference in land ownership. But I think with the way the proposals are, like say to eliminate the opportunity to harvest antlerless elk on national forest, I think in some ways we're addressing that because there's a limited amount of private land in 392 that would be, you know, folks could harvest antlerless elk on, but, you know, the bulk of the private land is in the new proposed hunting district would be the existing 391, and folks would still be able to harvest antlerless elk there. Obviously, you know, there are access concerns there, but like I say, we are trying to reduce the hunting pressure on public land elk on national forests with the hope, you know, that we can increase elk numbers over time there. Whether, you know, there's a big debate on, you know, once you lose elk off public land to private land, whether you can ever get them to go back or anything like that. But, you know, the elk, the public land elk that are currently there, that are migrating off during the winter or whatever, you know, at least at the very least, we can try to increase those elk numbers and everything.
Thanks, Adam. And Jared does have a raised hand. We've only got one more slide, so let's cover this last slide and then we'll come back to Jared and cover his question. So here's the last one, Adam.
Yeah, this is the mule deer aspect of 391. Again, we're looking at combining those two districts. For archery, it'd be either sex mule deer, 5-week general antlered buck. So as a result, the unlimited mule deer permit in what is now hunting district 392 would be eliminated. And then the B license for the new proposed district would not be valid on national forest land. Again, just we've got lots of mule deer on private land in that land ownership area. Mule deer numbers not so great on national forest land. And one of the reasons, you know, besides the directive to eliminate unlimited buck permits, one of the reasons for the proposed regulation to go to a general antlered buck is again to try to make the Big Belt mountain range as a whole as similar as possible. The regulation on the east side, hunting district 446, is a general antlered buck. So by proposing the new 391 district to be general antlered buck, we'd make that, we'd have the same mule deer buck regulation throughout the entire Big Belt. I do have to admit there is some concern on what the biological impacts of this recommendation may be on the area mule deer buck population, as U.S. Forest Service land in the current hunting districts 391 and 392 does have very low security, a lot of roads. There's been a loss of cover over the years. And going forward, there's the Forest Service is proposing some major vegetation work, which will probably result in more loss of cover. So anyway, again, there's a lot of security concerns there. So we, you know, that may impact, you know, we won't know for sure, but that, you know, going to the general antlered buck could potentially have some impacts on the mule deer buck population, because like I say, with that low security and by going with a general antlered buck, obviously we'll get a lot more hunters with that regulation than what we have with the unlimited permit for 392.
All right, thanks, Adam. So we've got a couple of hands raised. We'll start with Jared. Jared, if you yourself, there you go.
Yeah, Adam, just going back to the discussion, don't mean to beat a dead horse here, but the last question raised made a valid point and kind of addresses my concerns earlier on 390 being more like 391. You know, to me, it makes more sense, and I agree with the statement on 392, and keeping that its own unit and combining 391 and 390. I like the objectives you set for 391 and the seasons and regulations you set with the, if we could possibly go back to that slide so I could see it again, on the elk seasons for 391. You know, I think it makes sense to look at regulating the the bull and the cow harvest there. I don't agree with the shoulder seasons run into February 15th. I think that's, I think we've hit, to me, what seems like objectives on that, and that to continue it further seems really like an overall total an outburst on cow harvest. But looking at the structure there, the 5 weeks of brow tine bull, and then keeping that on the private land makes a lot of sense with 1B license, and combining 390 to 391. But I wanted to hit on that point because that question I think was very valid, and the similarities between 391 and 390 that I made earlier makes a lot more sense than combining 390 to 312 and 391 to 392.
Yeah, I don't know was there a question in there, or is that just kind of a comment?
Not a question, but I guess, I wanted to reiterate my statement there.
Okay.
I think with the question raised on 391 and 392, it just points more to the fact that 390 is more similar to 391 and 392 is to 391.
Okay, thanks, Jared. All right, we're gonna go to Brian, and Brian, you can go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Hey guys, first off, I do agree with Jared that 391 and 392 are not similar at all. They are completely different units. They have completely different set of circumstances that's going to help you guys manage that herd. My question is there any chance that, my main concern is mule deer, is there any chance that you guys would consider going or pushing for a limited entry mule deer tag in that district rather than a general tag? I know the director doesn't want you splitting up districts or whatnot, but I don't think there's any of you there that can actually argue and say that if you would get a general tag from Avalanche Gulch over to York Bar, that it would be anything other than a disaster. I mean, would that be anything you guys would consider going to?
Yeah, the option with the directive to do away with the unlimited mule deer buck permit, the other option would be instead of going to a general antlered buck season would be to do something like a 380. We just go with a limited buck permit and just set the number of limited permits similar to the current level of the unlimited mule deer buck permits. But that is definitely a potential option.
Okay, yeah, I know that your concern with 380 is extremely valid, but I think that this district is going to be almost as valid because 380 generally doesn't have that great of deer hunting, in my opinion. I go out there, but 392, anybody and everybody around here knows if you want to kill a deer to fill your freezer, and there's a lot of them out there, it is not hard.
I kind of noted that in the biology portion that with the current low levels of security and the high number of roads being in close proximity to Helena, I agree. There's definitely a concern for potential impacts on the mule deer buck population if we were to go to a general antlered buck season.
All right. Thanks for your time.
Definitely a valid point there.
Thanks for your time.
All right, thanks, Brian. Okay, everyone, that is the last slide that we have tonight. Are there any remaining questions? Okay, well, we want to thank everyone for joining tonight. We know it's been a long presentation. We've had a lot of proposals here in the region. So thanks everyone for participating, and thank you to the biologists for putting these proposals together and answering questions. Again, please go to our website and submit your comments. And the recording of this video will also be available on the website as well. So you can go back and see that or share it with other folks who.
Hey, Morgan, I see Brian Ricks has got his hand up.
Oh, I think we answered Brian's question last.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, okay.